All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm. What are we talking about first?
Coues deer.
Okay.
Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. We are coming at you live from Sonora, Mexico. I've got my associate, my compadre, Darr Colburn here with me. We are driving northbound on our way back to the United States. We have spent 4 days down here in Mexico scouting. We've got our Coues deer hunts, our fully guided Coues deer hunts, going to start here in January. This year we're going to do January 12th through the 20th, and then the 21st through the 29th, when our goal is to try and capture as much rutting action as we can. We have spent a good portion of our time just driving around the ranches and kind of familiarizing ourselves with all the roads, glassing points, and what have you. But I guess I should start and say, good morning, Darr. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Jay. How are you?
Good. We've been traveling here this morning, and it's been a fun couple of days. For me, it seems like all throughout the fall, even with all the elk hunts and all the different hunts that we have going on, it seems like my mind is always looking forward to and kind of looking past, if you will, to December and January in Sonora, Mexico. I know you feel the same way. What is it do you think it is about this place that we're driving through right now that's so beautiful, with all the yellow grass and mesquite and oaks and just the beautiful hills? What is it for you that just makes your mind race as well?
Well, I think it's the unknown, it's the unspoiled. I mean, we're looking out the windows here. We've been on the road since about 4:45 this morning. It's about 9 o'clock, and we got a big oak-covered mountain to our left with a bunch of yellow grass, ocotillo, rolling hills leading up to it, and it's just unspoiled.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to find.
Well, and I think, I've been coming down here since 1999, and you started coming right there pretty close thereafter. It's the unspoiled. It's, not only is it cool to come down and see a lot of bucks, a lot of deer, but it's you never know what's going to come out of the woodwork, and it seems like every year, a buck or two comes out of the woodwork that we dream about, and it just energizes me for the next year. Curious, your thoughts on how you think the scouting trip went this year down here, and what you'll be looking forward to coming here in another couple weeks in January.
Well, I'm excited about these properties we have that we'll be hunting. We'll be hunting them for the first time ourselves this year, and so that's always exciting. A lot of good country, a lot of the big ranches, and a lot of roads that we can get around on, but yet there's still some wild places on them that could be a sanctuary for a big buck or two. And just, it's awesome country, good glassable, open and thick, kind of a good mixture of low and high country, open and thick. I think it'll be good. We saw some nice deer this trip, so I'm excited to see what comes out during the rut.
Yeah, for sure. So the first property that we're going to be hunting is one of those that has a lot of high country, a lot of juniper, a lot of oak, lots of yellow grass, big mesas, and then there is some element of ocotillo and mesquite. And for the other ranch we looked at has a bunch of the same stuff as well. What country do you prefer to hunt in Sonora, as far as, is there a typical type terrain or brush or bush, or what do you like and why?
Well, I like hunting the ocotillos, the mesquites, the rollers with the canyons, smaller canyons. Um, it seems like a lot of good bucks like the ocotillos, and it's sometimes easier to hunt because the country's not quite as rough, and it's good glassing. But then again, some of the higher country stuff. We saw a big buck up in the Oaks this trip. So I kind of feel like there's more unknown up there as to what could come rolling off some of those big, thick mountains.
Yeah, and we try and focus our hunts in December and January, with December being the pre-rut hunts and, January being, the rut hunts. And you and I have been coming down here in December and January for a long time, and we have shot some really, really good bucks in December. And we've talked about before on the podcast how hunting in December, if you find a big buck, you a lot of times can get that buck killed. Whereas in January, they're running all over the hillsides and they're not standing still, and they're a little bit harder to catch up with. Just give your thoughts a little bit on the differences between hunting in December and January down here.
Well, it's the 21st
Yeah.
of December. We still, in the last few days, we saw bucks that were grouped up and were still together. So I think it can be a little bit harder to find the bucks, but when you do, there'll be several of them, and they're not moving around as much. They're still, I would say, they're a few weeks behind down here from where they are in the States.
So you're not talking specifically this year. You're saying
no, I'm just saying in general.
They're always a couple weeks behind.
That's what it seems like. So I think they're still grouped up a little bit. We did see a couple bucks yesterday morning, kind of, I would say, lightly sparring, just kind of pushing each other around a little bit. But they were still together. So I think in December, if you do find a buck, you have a very good chance of killing it because they're going to be in the same area. They're not going to be moving around much. In terms of seeing a big buck, it's hard to beat the rut. You never know what's going to come out and come wandering through. But, getting them shot can be a whole nother story. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. We've killed some great bucks in December, though.
Right. You talk about a big buck come rolling out. I heard you talk about you never know what's going to come rolling out. What do you mean by that? And is that something you see typically more in January happen? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, definitely. And when I say rolling out, a typical Coues deer range is about a mile when they're not in the rut, and they can be 3 or 4 miles from there during the rut. So those bigger bucks, those bucks are out covering country, moving around looking for hot does. So they're on their feet more, they're moving more, they're in the open more during the rut, so your chances of seeing them are a lot better.
We're trying to dodge traffic here. One of the things about roads here in Mexico, that even the highways, there's not a lot of shoulders, not a whole lot of money put in the shoulders on these roads, are there?
It's a white knuckle drive, isn't it?
Especially with me at the helm. We found a good buck the first day, and we had the whole day coming in. When we were looking at the forecast coming in, it was showing rain, and sure enough, it was 90 to 100% rain from the time we crossed the border to the time we got to the ranch, driving, all the way in the rain, pulling the trailer and what have you. Had just over 2 inches of rain at the ranch, and the country soaked it up pretty good. But it's amazing how as dry as it can go from being dusty and, hot and dry to, muddier than anything. Mm-hmm. And then, 2 days later, it's back to being dry and dusty again.
It doesn't take the country long to dry out.
We found that buck. We just kind of were spot glassing, driving, looking at country, kind of taking inventory of the roads and the glassing knobs. And, some people listening might be, wow, they're, hunting a new property. Darr and I, historically, we love hunting new properties. We love to, look at new country, and, we're not afraid to guide on properties that, that we haven't been hunting for 5 or 10 years. Part of the excitement for us loving to hunt is loving to look at that new country, wouldn't you say, Darr?
Yeah, definitely. And we're always searching for something,
special,
better, and trying new spots. This ranch we looked at, 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Came down and spent a couple days looking around and ended up leasing it, and sent some guys there last year, and they did really well. And so now we're hunting it this year, and excited to get to know it.
Yeah, for sure. So we had stopped a couple times glassing, and it was one of those mornings where so much rain from the day before. It seems like these Coues deer, whether it be wind or rain, but, certainly when you have a big rainy day, if you have sun right off the bat, a lot of times those deer will be standing as soon as the sun hits the mountains, but we still kind of had fog and kind of some overhanging. It seemed like they were a little bit slow on their feet, and I don't think we spotted this buck till it was probably close to 9 o'clock, maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we were glassing, literally right off the road, and I picked up a deer and said, Darr, I got a deer, and it turned out to be 2 bucks, and it turned out to be a heck of a buck, kind of a small framed, type buck.
Small, he's 100-inch mainframe.
Yeah, I mean, for a buck this big, it was, a smaller frame, narrow, 10 inches, 11-inch wide type deer. But he had all kinds of trash going all around the pedicle and all around his bases and his burr. He's got, I think, 3 or 4 kind of main eye guards on one side and 2 on the other with a little kicker off it. Just a crazy buck.
He's got a hook with a dropper off the hook on the one eye guard. So it's
it's good
neat
when you've got a dropper off the dropper.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be interesting to see that buck if we can find him again. Number one, we've had trips where we go down and see bucks or see them maybe on a first hunt in the case where if we're ever hunting, a property multiple times where we see the buck and we never see him again. The question I would ask you is, this buck obviously was spotted, in December. What's your gut tell you with the terrain, the way that country was laying, whether that buck will be right there or, will we find him 3 miles away somewhere?
Well, I think just to paint a picture where he was, there's a ridge that runs north-south roughly, and kind of a mesa on top, and the western slope of this range or ridge is pretty yellow grass open. He would be on the east-facing slope where it's thick and oaked and a lot thicker vegetation is where he was this trip. It would not surprise me if he popped up on the other side and was chasing does more in the open stuff.
So, if you're kind of giving some, sorry, I'm taking photos with my cell phone and driving with my knee here. If you were to give someone advice, maybe in the same situation, whether it be in Sonora or be in Arizona, if you find a buck scouting before the rut and then the rut's coming, you're saying that you might look in a little bit more open country. I think I just saw some turkeys.
Focus, Jay.
Yeah,
it's not turkey season.
Just derail the whole program here. You might see the buck in December on a real thick hillside, but as the rut progresses, would you agree that more does are more in the open country? Therefore, when you're trying to find bucks during the rut, you got to look where the does are, and
Correct.
They typically are a little bit more in open areas. Not that a doe can't be on the thickest hillside there is, but
right. But this buck was in the thicker stuff, and I should say the steeper slope. It was a a steeper side of the mountain. I think, more does are going to be in the more gentle slope and the more open side when it's cold, especially. So I think that's where he would pull to during the rut.
Right, and also I've found during the rut, curious your thoughts, they do tend to go to a little bit more flatter ground that's not quite so steep, and I think that's a breeding issue. They would rather breed on flatter ground, which kind of makes sense.
Sure.
Any thoughts on that, or
yeah,
do you
agree.
not agree with that?
No, I do totally agree with that. We've definitely hunted ranches where it seems like one particular area of the ranch, it's the rut zone or the rut hole, as we'd say, and for whatever reason, that's just bucks come in there. You might not ever see them outside of the rut, but they show up there during the rut.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point because, I don't know how many ranches, but we've probably been to 45 or 50 different ranches down here, and it's always funny how there's always on each ranch, it doesn't matter how big it is. I mean, it could be anywhere from, 3,000 acres to 30,000 acres. It seems like there's a couple of good spots that are consistent rut, like you can go there every day and see different bucks. You can go there every day and see different rutting deer. What is it about that aspect of a rut zone you think is important for a Coues deer hunter to kind of focus on?
I don't know if it's the gentler country or there's just a lot of does there. The does come in there too, or what it is about it. But it just seems like every ranch there'll be a hot spot where there'll be a pretty good concentration of rutting activity and different bucks, like you said, showing up there day after day, in and out.
Let's talk about this buck a little bit. And, frame-wise, when I first saw the buck, you said, "Is it a good one?" I said, it's okay. It didn't jump out at me as a big deer, and I think Coues deer, because they're so small in size, typically a big buck, a big rack on a Coues deer typically looks big. But we have had bucks that are narrow, kind of tight, compact frames that still are high-scoring big bucks, but they don't look as big until you really focus in and see all of what's going on. Talk a little bit about wider frame bucks, taller tine bucks, bucks with mass. When you're glassing, kind of what is your key of, this is a really good buck? What jumps out at you?
Well, like you said, I mean, the width and the frame, main beam and point length are the two biggest contributors to high score. So usually if they're wide and high, it's a pretty good buck. This particular buck was kind of, like you said, pretty narrow, pretty tight, and he was also really heavy, which I think hides the length and makes him, not look as impressive right off the bat until you get the spotting scope and really... Because with your 15s in your defense, you couldn't see all the stuff going on down below.
Right, I was just looking at frame and, could tell it was, a decent buck, but it didn't look anything special. It wasn't until we put the spotting scope on it to realize that, this is a pretty neat buck. I mean, he's got, 25 inches of extra stuff going on that you would probably never see. I mean, if you were to see that buck at, a mile or two just panning across, I don't even know that you'd get the spotting scope out. But it's a good lesson that I need to learn almost every year, is that you should, if you see bucks, it's worth putting the spotting scope on them just to confirm, because you can have these small frame bucks that have all kinds of extras, or even a main beam, or even like Lee's buck last year shot a buck with an extra main beam. It wasn't until I really started looking at the buck and then saw that, whatever it is, 12 inches of extra main beam there, that can make the difference, in a 100-inch buck and a 112-inch buck.
Right, and I saw that Lee's buck in the velvet in the summertime, and I didn't even see the extra main beam until I got home and was looking at the video on my computer. So,
and I think that's a good reason why Coues deer hunters need to put a scope on every single buck and just confirm. But let's bounce back to something you had said before. When you're talking about score, we've gone over it on the podcast before, how point length in Coues deer is everything. That's the biggest contributor to your Boone and Crockett, gross score is point length. The second thing is main beam. But when you have, and then mass and spread's last. But when you have a buck that's wide, one of the things you have to keep in mind, if you have a wide buck and it has good beams, typically because that buck is wide, those beams go out, and then if they come back in the front, you're going to pick up a lot of inches because of the width of a buck, whereas most narrow bucks are going to have shorter main beams.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you're gaining, even an inch or two on each main beam and then an inch or two width. I mean, that adds up pretty quick on Coues deer.
Yeah, and when you're looking at bucks, it's hugely important to not only look at the width, but get that head-on look if you can, or straight from behind, and try and judge how far do those beams come around and come back to, almost touching or coming close together. The more that those beams, quote-unquote, wrap around, the more inches you're going to get. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If your beams go out and have a lot of wrap and have a lot of curl, you're just picking up inches as you go. When you look at a buck, you obviously are kind of looking at or I'll speak for myself and I'll let you answer, but I'm kind of looking at frame first. But the initial thing I'm looking for is, what are his point length? Because you can have a narrow buck with really long tines that's a super high score, but it's hard to have a wide buck with short points. If you guys are looking at short points that are, 2, 3, 4 inches, you're going to have a hard time getting that buck up in a, big buck category. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Doc?
I totally agree. So, I mean, point length is huge, for sure.
The other thing is extra points are huge. If the difference between a 3x3 and a 4x4, even if his G4s are, say, 3 or 4 inches, say they're 4 inches, that's 8 inches extra. So if you just take what looks like a mainframe 3x3 and you have little G4s that are, 4 inches long and they don't really look like much, that instantly adds 8 inches to your score.
True. Plus, it pushes your mass measurement back farther on the beam, which is going to help your score as well.
Right. So normally on a 3-point frame, which you guys, you Easterners or Midwesterners we're talking about mainframe 8 points, what we call a 3x3 with eye guards. On the Boone and Crockett system, in order to get your mass measurement, your fourth mass measurement, you go to the G3 and measure from where the G3 hits the main beam out to the tip of the main beam. And let's say that distance was 6 inches. You would take your mass measurement there at the halfway mark, at the 3-inch mark. If it was 8 inches, you would take it at the 4-inch mark. But if you have G4s, typically your fourth mass measurement is going to be a little bit bigger than a mainframe 8, or what we would call a 3x3 with eye guards.
Correct.
You want to take one of those dogs home with you?
Yeah, there's dogs playing in the road.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think they'd last long if they're roughhousing in the road.
I don't think they do, actually. It's probably the meat we just ate. Let's see. Non-typical bucks with extra points, those add up quick. I like looking at a buck. I like looking at bucks, and if they've got good eye guards, good G2s, good G3s, and when I say good, if you can get that 3-inch on the eye guard, you can get that 8-inch G2. If you see an 8-inch G2, and if you can get those G3s in that 6, 7, 8 range, you're usually looking at a pretty good buck. Of course, we've talked about spread. In the percentage game, spread is the least amount that goes into your score. But you have to keep in mind, wider bucks typically score better because of what we talked about with the main beams. And typically if they're wider and they've got some age to them, those beams end up wrapping around, and you're just picking up inches.
Right.
For as much as they wrap around, you're picking up inches the whole way.
And I would say most of the Coues deer bucks we shoot are, on average, I would say 12 to 13 inches wide. Would you not agree?
Yeah, I mean,
we have definitely shot them wider than that, but
it's very rare. When I'm plugging in my numbers, I'm typically plugging in a 12-inch spread. If I look at it and go, it looks wide, I might kick in a 13 or 14 if it looks wide, but 12 is my general number. If he looks narrow, sometimes it's 10 and a half, 11 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen them under 10 inches, but to get a big buck, you're looking at a 12, at least a 12-inch spread.
Right.
If I had to cookie cutter it, you'd say you want at least a 12-inch spread. But you brought up another point. I talked about it on the podcast with the latest desert bighorn sheep hunt, where mass hides length, and specifically when you start talking about Coues deer, mass definitely hides length. We've seen it time and time again where a buck that we know is heavy, that looks heavy, might look short. Perfect example is the buck that Dan Boyd shot several years ago in Mexico. Dean Heitzelman and I were watching that buck, and we knew he was a good buck. We just couldn't get him much over 105 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And he had so much mass that he made the points look short.
Yeah, I would agree.
Not short, but they just didn't look as long as they were. And you want to plug in a 12 or a 13 number when you're talking per side on mass. But we've seen bucks, 16, 17, 18 inches of mass per side, which, you're looking at, 4-inch wrap on your four circumferences would be a 16. And you start getting, 4.5. That starts pushing you up around that 18-inch.
That's heavy.
That's a heavy buck. Yeah, that's a heavy buck.
Yeah.
That's about as heavy as they get.
Well, one of my favorite bucks from last year was, I believe Cameron shot it, and it was what was it, 108? 107.
Yeah.
A typical 3x3. And he was probably, 12 inches wide? But super heavy. You held that buck, and he was just heavy.
Yeah, I forget what his measurements
I can't
were,
remember
but
either,
I would venture to guess his mass was in the 17 per side range, 34 inches of mass.
Just kind of a tight, heavy, perfect 3x3, but just the mass was awesome on it. Yeah,
and mass is everything for me for look. You get that mass, that's usually a sign of an older age buck. You get some of these pencily bucks. A perfect example that Adam Faz, friend of ours, he shot a great buck in Arizona that looks like a giant buck, but he's kind of pencily thin. He doesn't have a lot of mass, and he looks like a mid-teens buck. But then you add in the mass, and I think he's like a 109-inch buck. Phenomenal buck, not taking it away, just trying to use it as an example of when you've got those skinnier mass. One, skinnier mass makes points look longer.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of if it's heavy, it looks shorter. When it's thinner, they look longer. So you've got to watch that. Check that mass and kind of look at your body size and trying to determine, is this a mature deer? And Adam's deer was actually a real mature deer. He just didn't have any mass for a buck of that size.
Right.
But when you get a buck with mass and with length, point length and heavy beams, you're starting to, get up into a really, really nice buck. We switched and went over to the other ranch, spent a couple days at the other ranch, and one of the things I like about it is it's got quite a bit of that, Ocotillo mesquite kind of haired over look that both you and I really like, and we've hunted a bunch of ranches that's had some of that, but I don't know that we hunted one that has as much as this. Now, these are mountain ranches, not desert ranches.
Right.
We've hunted desert ranches that have quite a bit of it, but it's a little bit different type. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this ranch is a mountain ranch, and it does have the ocotillos and the rollers, but it's a lot more haired over than a purely desert flats ranch with ocotillos.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about, we've got obviously our hunts coming up here in January, but next year we're actually going to be we already do some do-it-yourself hunts. We've got guys down in Mexico right now hunting and other guys in January, but we're also going to be doing, you're going to be doing some hosted trips, semi-guided, where you're going to be going down with a group to Mexico, and it's going to be, semi-guided where you will be with the group of, say, 4, 5, 6 guys. You'll be glassing for the entire group, trying to, find big bucks. You'll be helping them kill those bucks, skin those bucks, cape those bucks. You'll be providing the food. But, guys can bring their own rangers, guys can bring their own trucks, but you'll be there from the start to finish. So you'll basically cross them. You'll go through all of the steps to, get their firearms across, go through the military checkpoints, escort them to the ranch, and you'll be, in essence, a camp boss, so to speak. You'll be a host. You'll be, a situation where normally you and I would both be there, both of us guiding. You'll be the one guiding, and you'll help one guy kill a buck, and then you and that guy will then continue to help everybody until the camp is full. And we already have some established dates for that. Tell me how you think that's going to go, and are you looking forward to it?
I am. I mean, I think the benefit is it's a notch above a do-it-yourself, where a lot of the do-it-yourselfers they don't know how to cross and this and that, so they want someone with them to and from the ranch and handling the paperwork and that sort of stuff. So I think it's a different service, just another level of service. And this trip is a perfect example. You go down in December, and we saw some really nice bucks, and we very easily could have shot them.
Yeah.
So December can be a good time. You could shoot just as big a buck in December as you can in January.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're one of those guys that really likes to glass, and you really like to dig bucks out, and you really like to, work at it and glass all day and really enjoy Coues deer hunting, I mean, December can be a phenomenal time, like we talked about earlier, in the fact that, bucks are usually together. Bucks are, you can throw a blanket over them. Usually they don't go more than about 100 yards, maybe a couple 100 yards, and they're always kind of in that circle. And so you spot a buck on day one, and you kind of say, well, I'm going to keep looking. It's a possibility on day 4 you can go right back there and glass in that same shady basin, and that buck plus his buddies are all going to be right there. The other thing is, when they're traveling with other bucks, and you have an identifier. Oh, that's a 2x3, and he's a gray bodied, or he's a tan bodied, or something distinguished, or he's got a split ear or something, and you go back there and you're like, well, I've got his buddy. He's probably
not
right
far
there,
away,
and usually they're within 15, 20 yards,
right,
with the same group. And I think that's going to be a great hunt for some guys that maybe don't want to pay the price for the fully guided version of the hunt, but still get you, who's an incredibly talented Coues deer hunter, someone that they can learn from, and someone that they could have a lot of fun with, and it will up their chances of success of harvesting a nice buck a lot. And it still gives them the option to have some DIY qualities of having their own four-wheeler, or having their own side-by-side or what have you, and being able to do some prospecting on their own, but have the ability to have you glassing for the whole group with the trying to get everybody good bucks. And I think that's something that needs to be talked about, because one of the fun things about hunting down here in Mexico is hunting completely private land. And it's really fun when you're hunting with a group of people and you have a common goal of trying to, okay, I shot my buck, now I'm going to become a glasser, and I'm going to try and find,
everybody's working together. Yeah.
Everybody's working together and trying to, get everybody in the group a nice buck. And it's always nice if you're the last couple of guys, and you haven't filled, and the other 4 guys are all helping you. It's a great position to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say too, you're getting potentially first crack at these deer, where we might go back during the rut and hunt, but you could have first chance at being first on the ranch potentially that year.
Yeah, and back to the bucks, you go back and the predictability of a buck, whereas you go in the rut, what I've found is typically in the rut, if you find a big buck, you don't really have the luxury of letting that buck go, because more than likely that buck's going to be in a different county, and it's pretty common not to see bucks that are rutting in the same spot very often. They're kind of checking different doe groups and really moving around, and I think that speaks for when you're glassing rutting bucks. It's good to have big vantages where you can cover lots of country, whereas when you're hunting December bucks, big vantages are great, but then once you figure out where the bucks are, you want to hone your vantage down and kind of concentrate on either that vegetation type or the slope or what have you.
Right. I would agree. And another thing I would say is that if you're hunting a ranch that has a higher deer density, those bucks probably aren't going to move around as much, potentially, because there's more does in a smaller area. Whereas like last year, one of the places we hunted, we found a particular spot on the ranch that seemed like there was some does in there, and it was kind of like we talked about a rut hole, and we shot a couple bucks out of there, and a couple days later there was other bucks, totally different bucks in there. So those bucks were obviously coming from somewhere else, so they were probably moving around more in that country when it's lower density.
Let's talk a little bit about hunting in Mexico. We talk about mountain ranches, we talk about desert ranches. We've said it before, the differences between the two. I would ask you, what is your preference to hunt and why?
I like the mountain ranches just because the scenery, the terrain. I don't think they produce consistently the biggest bucks every year. But you always hear of several big ones from mountain ranches. The desert, I mean, we've been down there, we've hunted it. I think when you shot your big giant 130s buck down there, we went, if I remember right, we hunted 7 days together, splitting up, going different spots on the ranch, and I think we saw 5 or 6 bucks in a week of hunting, where you'll see that typically on these ranches in a morning. So yeah. It's a lot more action, a lot more glassing. So I enjoy that part of it, the glassing and the little bit rougher country, the big looks, high vantage points, that sort of thing, and seeing deer. It's fun seeing deer, seeing them rut. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think too on mountain ranches, on desert ranches, sometimes you can see that big buck out there at 2 or 3 miles out in those flats, but they're very, very difficult to kill, which is one reason why sometimes they can get pretty big. But you've got low densities. They're hard to kill because you have nothing to get up on to shoot in sniper position, sniper style, where you're going to be shooting across a canyon or off a knob and be able to connect with the buck that's out in the flats. A lot of times those big Coues deer you see that come out of down by Hermosillo, a lot of those bucks are shot right off of a high rack
or water
when they're driving around looking for big mule deer and just happen to catch a buck that's within range of the vehicle up on top of the high rack, or you're sitting water. And I'm not knocking either method of hunting at all. I just prefer hunting the mountains. I prefer being up on tall points, glassing across canyons, being able to then figure out how we're going to get from point A to point B to get in position to shoot that buck. And, we have access to hunt desert and mountain ranches, but it seems we're always drawn to hunting mountain ranches.
Right. I would totally agree with everything you said.
And the density part of it is something that I thought I would talk about. Is it seems as though we've hunted ranches down here in Mexico where you literally see 25, 30, 40 bucks in a day. Bucks and deer all over. It's been my experience that the 100-inch plusers don't come off of those ranches. You get a lot of 80, 90-inch type bucks, 95-inch bucks, but maybe 100 inches is the best buck.
You got to look through a lot of bucks, weed through them to find a 100-incher.
Yeah, and it's super, super fun if you're, used to hunting in Arizona and maybe don't have the success and that you want and don't get to see a lot of deer. That's phenomenal. But when you get to a point where you like seeing those bigger bucks and you're willing to look at half or a quarter as many bucks. It seems as though the ranches that, you see, say, 3 to 6, 7 bucks a day, for whatever reason, it seems like those kind of ranches typically produce in the mountains, those little bit lower, medium kind of density ranches produce bigger bucks.
Yeah, I would agree. But they're not quite as low density as you would have, down in the low desert.
Right. Well, guys, I hope you got some value out of this podcast. I know Darr and I are excited for our January hunts. We are going to be posting a bunch of pictures on our Instagram pages. You can check out Darr's page at Darr Colburn. That's Darr Colburn. You can also check the show notes for the link. You can go on our website if you want more information about our hunts, colburn&scottoutfitters.com. It seems like with social media these days, Darr, the most instant information and most instant access to us is sending us a DM through Instagram. It's just so easy for people to message us and or get on their phones and look at photos and kind of see what we're all about. And
or if you just want to know where Jay is this week, just go on his Instagram. If he's fishing or hunting or whatever he's doing.
That's a little bit of a dig I sense there.
Where in the world is Jay Scott?
You can follow my Instagram at jscottoutdoors. You can send me an email, jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. As always, we appreciate your support, both on our podcast and on the Instagram pages. And if you want to have any information about upcoming hunts for any animals, including Coues deer, Gould's turkey, or whatever it might be, just send us a message and we'll get back to you. And we really appreciate your loyal support and the sponsor support. Go Hunt, Insider, Coues, Phone Scope, and the Outdoorsmans. So guys, take care. Adios. We're going to be crossing. We're getting close to the border here. And we're just looking forward to turning around and coming back here in January.